The morning I sold my house, I told myself it was the proudest day of my life. I stood in the empty living room, the one where my daughter had taken her first steps, where we'd eaten Christmas dinner on a folding table because we couldn't afford a real one, where I'd cried alone at midnight more times than I could count, and I signed the papers with a steady hand. 63 years old, and I was starting over. Not for me. For her. For Lily. My real estate agent handed me the check and said, "So what are you going to do now, Margaret?" And I smiled and said, "Watch my daughter change the world." I meant it with every single bone in my tired body. I should tell you who I am before I tell you what happened. My name is Margaret. I spent 31 years working as an administrative coordinator at a regional hospital in Ohio. Not glamorous work, not well-paid work, but honest work, and I showed up every single day, even the morning after my husband Richard passed, because Lily was 11 years old and someone had to keep the lights on. I raised her alone in that 3-bedroom house on Clover Street. I drove her to debate club and science fairs and, later, to every single pitch competition she entered, even the ones in cities 4 hours away. Even when I had to request days off without pay, Lily was brilliant. She always had been. The kind of brilliant that made teachers pull you aside and say things like exceptional and rare. And she's going to do something remarkable. I believed them. I believed her. I believed in her the way only a mother who has sacrificed quietly and completely can believe in a child with no conditions attached, no expectation of return, just pure, consuming faith. When she was 28, she came to me with a business plan, printed in a spiral-bound folder. 37 pages. Charts, projections, market analysis. She wanted to open a design consultancy, branding and interior design for boutique hospitality businesses, hotels, restaurants, upscale bed and breakfasts. She had the talent. She had 3 potential clients already interested. What she didn't have was startup capital. She needed $80,000. I listened to her pitch sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands. She was nervous. Her voice shook a little at the beginning, the way it used to when she'd recite her lines in the school play, and then it steadied. And she was precise and passionate, and so achingly prepared. And I thought, I am watching the person my daughter was always meant to become. I told her I'd think about it. I thought about it for exactly one night. The house was worth $140,000. I would clear just under $100,000 after paying off the remaining mortgage. I could give Lily what she needed and have enough left to rent a small apartment across town and live carefully on my hospital pension. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't what I'd imagined for my retirement. But I had raised this girl, and I had watched her work. And I knew that this was the right thing to do. I didn't tell her immediately. I called her a week later and asked her to meet me at the kitchen table again. I slid the check across to her, and she looked at it, and then she looked at me, and her eyes filled up in a way I hadn't seen since the night we buried her father. "Mom," she said, "I can't take this." "You can," I said, "and you will, and you're going to be extraordinary." She held on to me for a long time in the doorway before she left. I told myself that was worth everything. For 3 years, it was. Lily launched Callaway Studio. She used her middle name, her grandmother's name, and within 18 months it was profitable. Within 2 years, she had a waiting list. She hired 4 employees. She was featured in a regional design magazine. She moved out of her apartment and into a condo in a nicer part of Columbus. She called me every Sunday, without fail, and she would tell me about projects and clients and problems she was solving, and I would sit in my rented apartment with the too-thin carpet and the radiator that clicked all winter. And I would feel something so close to joy that I couldn't tell the difference. Then she met Daniel. He came from what people in certain circles call old money, which mostly means the money is real, but the manners are selective. His family had been in commercial real estate for generations. He was handsome and well-dressed, and spoke with the kind of quiet authority that comes from never once in your life having to wonder if the check would clear. He was 36 when they met. Lily was 31. I met him for the first time at a dinner Lily arranged at a restaurant downtown, the kind of place with no prices on the menu. I wore my good navy blazer. I asked him thoughtful questions. I laughed at the right moments. I was, I think, a perfectly reasonable dinner companion. He was polite. Distant. The way someone is polite when they've been raised to perform courtesy without actually delivering it. On the drive home, I told myself I was being uncharitable. He was probably just nervous. First meeting with the girlfriend's mother. Perfectly understandable. I told myself that. For the next 2 years, they got engaged on a trip to Portugal that Daniel planned. He sent me a photo of the ring before Lily could call me herself, which I thought was a little strange, but decided to find charming. The ring was enormous. I told her it was beautiful. I told her I was so happy. I meant both things. The wedding planning began, and this is where I need to slow down and be precise, because I want you to understand exactly what happened and exactly how I allowed it to happen, because that part matters too. Daniel's family, it became clear very quickly, had opinions, strong ones. They wanted the wedding at a private estate outside Cincinnati that his family had used for generations. They had a vision, formal, grand, a guest list of 200, a certain aesthetic, a certain standard. Lily was swept up in it. I watched it happen with the particular helplessness of a mother who sees her child changing shape to fit someone else's container, and I kept telling myself, this is her life, this is her love, let her have this. The first thing I paid for was the engagement party. Lily called and explained carefully. Daniel's parents were covering the rehearsal dinner, the honeymoon, the venue deposit, but the engagement party, a gathering of 60 people at a rented event space, didn't fit neatly into anyone's budget. Could I help? $12,000. I said yes. The second thing was the wedding dress. This one, I didn't have to be asked. Lily mentioned she had an appointment at a boutique and I asked if I could come, and she paused just a beat too long before she said of course. I drove 2 hours to be there. The boutique was the kind of place where they bring you champagne before you've sat down. Lily tried on 7 dresses. She was luminous in every single one. I sat in the ivory chair across from the fitting platform, and I watched my daughter look at herself in a $10,000 gown, and I thought, she deserves this. She deserves every stitch of this. I paid for the dress. Over the next several months, there were other things. A contribution toward the florist because the original estimate ran over. The bridesmaids' luncheon, a custom monogram for the cake. Each time I said yes. Each time I told myself this was love. This was what you did. This was the natural completion of everything I had started when I handed her that check at the kitchen table 6 years ago. What I didn't let myself acknowledge, not really, not honestly, was that Daniel's mother never once thanked me. That Daniel himself, when Lily would mention my contributions, would nod in a way that suggested the information had been received, but not particularly registered. That I was, in the vocabulary of this new world my daughter was entering, a resource, useful, appreciated in the functional sense, not cherished. The first time I felt it clearly not as a worry I could push aside, but as a fact was at the final venue walkthrough, 8 weeks before the wedding. Daniel's mother, Eleanor, a woman who wore cashmere, the way other people wear armor, was walking me through the reception seating chart. She gestured to a round table near the back, partially behind a decorative pillar, and said, "We've put you here with a few of Daniel's relatives from his father's side. I think you'll find plenty to talk about." I looked at the chart. The pillar would block my view of the head table. Of Lily. "That's lovely," I said, because I did not yet know how to say anything else. The week before the wedding, Lily called me. It was a Tuesday night. And I remember because I had just finished watching the evening news and had poured myself a small glass of wine, which I do sometimes on Tuesday evenings when the world has been too much. The call came at 8:47 p.m. I know because I looked at the clock when her name appeared on the screen. And then I looked at it again after we hung up, and I needed to account for the time in between. Her voice was careful, the way it gets when she has rehearsed something. "Mom, I need to talk to you about the reception." I set down my wine. She explained Daniel's family had expanded the guest list at the last moment. Some business associates of his father's, important people. The kind of connections that mattered for the future they were building. The tables had been reconfigured, and the new layout meant, she paused here, just a fraction it meant there wasn't really a seat for me at the reception in the same way as before. I asked her to say that again. She said it again. There would still be a seat for me, she was very clear about that. She said it twice, but it was in the overflow room. an adjacent space where they would have a live stream of the reception on a screen. It's really nice, Mom. It's not like a waiting room or anything. There's food, there's a bar, an overflow room, I said, just for the reception. You'd still be at the ceremony, obviously, front row, right next to Lily. My voice was very quiet. I noticed that. Did you agree to this? The pause was 4 seconds. I counted. It's complicated, she said. Daniel's family, they have a lot of relationships to manage, and did you agree to this? She didn't answer the question. She said she loved me. She said she was sorry, it was confusing. She said she hoped I understood. She said she would make it up to me. They both would. After the honeymoon, when things calmed down. After we hung up, I sat in my chair for a long time. I thought about the check I had written 6 years ago at the kitchen table. I thought about Eleanor and her cashmere and her pillar table. I thought about Daniel nodding when my contributions were mentioned. I thought about my daughter's voice, rehearsed and careful, asking me to understand. And I thought about a woman I used to know at the hospital, an older nurse named Patricia, who had a saying she used for situations that had gone quietly, gradually, completely wrong. She would say, "The frog never feels the water heating up." I got up and went to my desk and I opened my laptop. I looked at everything I had contributed. The engagement party, the dress, the florist overage, the luncheon, the monogram. The various small things I had said yes to because love doesn't calculate, because motherhood doesn't keep receipts, because I had raised this girl and I wanted nothing but her happiness. The total was just under $47,000. On top of the $80,000 startup loan that had never been formalized as a loan, that had no paperwork, that had simply been handed over at a kitchen table because I trusted her completely. I didn't sleep that night. What I did instead was think, with more clarity than I'd had in years, about the difference between love and erasure, because I had been so certain they were compatible, that you could love someone so completely that being made invisible was just the cost, just the texture of the thing, just what it meant to be a mother. I had confused sacrifice with selflessness. I had confused selflessness with worthlessness. And I had let the distinction blur for so long that I had ended up, at 63 years old, sitting in a thin carpeted apartment trying to understand how I had become someone who could be put in an overflow room. In the morning, I called my sister Carol. Carol is 4 years older than me and has never in her life held her tongue when she should have spoken. She listened to everything without interrupting, which was how I knew she was furious. Because Carol's silence is always angrier than other people's shouting. When I finished, she said, "Margaret, what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I said. "But I know I'm done making decisions from a place of fear." I went to the wedding ceremony. I had said I would. And I kept my word. I sat in the front row on the left side, the bride's side, in the cornflower blue dress I had bought specifically for the occasion. The ceremony was beautiful. Lily was beautiful. She walked down the aisle on Daniel's father's arm, his father's arm, not mine, because Eleanor had arranged it that way weeks earlier. And when she reached the altar and turned, she found my face in the crowd, and for just a moment she looked like my daughter again, entirely and completely, the way she used to when she was small and needed me. I smiled at her. I meant it. During the cocktail hour, before the reception began, a young woman with a clipboard found me and directed me toward a set of double doors on the east side of the building. "The overflow lounge is right through here," she said pleasantly. "You'll have full view of the reception on the screen. And the same menu." "I know," I said. "Thank you." I walked through the doors. I sat down at a table covered in the same ivory linen as the reception room. There was a small television screen mounted on the wall. On it, I could see the reception hall, the beautiful floral arrangements, the candlelight, the 200 guests, finding their seats. I could see the head table. I could see my daughter. She didn't look for me. I sat there for approximately 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my phone with a peculiar steadiness, the way you watch a clock when you're waiting for something to confirm itself. And what confirmed itself, in those 11 minutes, was something I had been refusing to let be true for 2 years. I was not a guest. I was not a mother of the bride. I was a woman who had funded the occasion and been tidied away so as not to complicate the aesthetic. I picked up my purse. I said goodbye to no one because there was no one there who would notice. I walked through the lobby, past the event coordinator who looked startled, past the valet stand, to where my car was parked on the street 2 blocks away because I hadn't wanted to pay for valet parking. I sat in my car. I made one phone call. Not to Lily. Not to Daniel. I called Carol. And I said 4 words. I'm doing it. And then I called the bank. The following morning, while Lily and Daniel were presumably at the first breakfast of their married life, 2 things happened. The check I had written 6 weeks earlier, my final contribution, toward additional floral arrangements that Eleanor had requested at the last moment, was returned. And a letter, which I had spent most of the previous night writing very carefully, was sent to both Lily's personal email and the business email for Callaway Studio. The letter was not angry. I want to be very clear about that, because anger would have made it easier to dismiss. It was careful and precise and honest in a way that I had not allowed myself to be for years. It said that I loved my daughter without reservation. It said that the $80,000 I had given her 6 years ago had been given freely, as a gift, with no conditions. And I had meant that, and I still meant it. It said that the additional $47,000 I had contributed to her wedding was also given freely, and I did not intend to reclaim it. But it also said this: I have spent the last several years making myself smaller so that you and Daniel could feel larger, and I am not able to continue doing that. Not because I love you less, because I love myself enough finally to stop. I asked for nothing in return. I made no demands. I simply said that I would be available when she was ready to talk, and that until she was, I intended to take care of myself. I turned off my phone and drove to Carol's house, 4 hours away, and slept in her guest room for 2 days. The fallout, from what Carol relayed to me, was considerable. The return check created a cascade. Some final vendor payments had apparently been contingent on it in ways I hadn't known. There were uncomfortable conversations. Eleanor was reportedly furious. Daniel was reportedly blindsided. Lily called 17 times in the first 3 days. I didn't answer, not because I wanted to punish her, because I needed to know when she finally reached me what she would say, whether she would explain, whether she would minimize, whether she would tell me I had embarrassed her, or that I had overreacted, or that I needed to consider Daniel's family's position. She called for the 18th time on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the wedding, and I picked up. She didn't explain. She didn't minimize. She said, "Mom, I put you in that room, and I knew what I was doing, and I told myself you would understand because you always understand, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that I let that become a reason to treat you that way." She cried. I cried. We stayed on the phone for a long time. It wasn't fixed in that phone call. I want to be honest about that because I think it's important. The stories that tell you one conversation heals everything are not doing anyone any favors. There were more conversations. There were hard ones. There was one, about 4 months later, where Lily told me that she had realized she'd been afraid that if she stood up to Daniel's family, she would lose the life she was building, and she had chosen that fear over me, and she was ashamed of it. That conversation was the one that mattered most. Because she wasn't asking me to excuse it. She was asking me to witness it. I witnessed it. I also did something else in those months, something I should have done long before. I started saying no, not to everything, not in bitterness. But I finally, at 63 years old, learned the particular freedom of a boundary that comes from self-respect rather than self-protection. I said no to things that cost me more than I had. I said no to silence when I should have spoken. I said yes to the small apartment with the thin carpet. But I bought a new rug, a good one, the kind I'd always walked past in stores and told myself was an indulgence. I put it in front of the couch, and I stood on it every morning in my socks, and I thought, this is mine. This is what I chose for myself. Lily and Daniel are still married. I won't pretend the relationship with Daniel is warm, it is cordial. And cordial is what I have decided to accept for now. Lily and I have dinner once a month, just the 2 of us, and she calls on Sundays again. And there is something different in the calls now, more honest, more careful, more mutual. She told me recently that she'd begun keeping a record of every business decision she makes, because she wants to remember how it started, where the money came from, who believed in her first. She doesn't need to keep a record. I know who I am to her story. I know what I built and what I gave and what it cost me. And I have made peace with the cost, not because it was fair, because it wasn't, but because the alternative was carrying resentment for the rest of my life, and I have a good rug to stand on, and a sister who answers on the first ring in mornings that belong entirely to me. A woman I admired once told me that the most radical thing a mother can do is decide her own life is worth living fully. I used to think that was a little selfish. I understand now that it is the only way to love someone honestly with your whole self present, not just the parts you've decided are convenient to offer. I sold my house for my daughter. I would do it again. But I will never again sit in an overflow room. Not for anyone. And if you've spent any part of your life making yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger, I hope you hear this. The room you're in right now, the one that feels like it was designed for you to be forgotten in, that is not where your story ends. It is where you finally decide to stand up and walk out. That's what I did. And I have never once looked back through those double doors.